Hey guys, welcome to part 7 of this Mastering with Ozone 7 Advanced tutorial course where we're actually diving into Ozone 7 now. So what you see on the screen right now is the standalone version of iZotope Ozone 7 Advanced. It's one of the new features of Ozone 7 is that it comes with its own standalone plugin. I love this feature because it makes it seem like it's its own entity, its own software, its own process. Now, obviously it is because it's standalone, it's not inside of a DAW. But with previous versions of Ozone 7, you had to load it up. You only had the only way to load it up was inside your DAW. Now, as you've seen previously in the last few videos, you can do that with Ozone 7. But we talked about this idea of kind of getting in the mastering mindset. And for me specifically, this allows me to get in the mastering mindset quickly and easily because I'm not looking at a DAW. I'm looking at something entirely different. So I prefer to use Ozone 7 as a standalone plugin when I'm actually mastering my music. So I wanted to talk about some of the controls. Everything else is the same. Everything that you see here is pretty much the exact same as in the DAW plugin version, except that this top bar right here. You get a transport bar with things like previous track, stop, play, move the playhead, loop the playback, and you get a position indicator. So it can load up more than one track at a time, which is really cool. You can use all the presets that you typically have. So let's look at this real quick. We're going to load in a track here. It's a track that is pretty hard. It's compressed a little bit through the mix, but it could benefit from some mastering. It's a pop track. So what we're going to do here is we're going to add a little fade in. You can add a little fade out, which is really nice. You can trim the length. So there's a fade out. So it's really cool. You can actually see the audio. You can loop sections and tell it to loop it. Like let's say if you're trying to get the chorus to make sure the chorus is hitting right, you can just loop that and it will only loop the playback. So if I hit play now. Can't help it, I'm saying never sorry to say. You know, you can hear all that happening, which is really cool. So you can change the loop point. So it's really awesome that, to me at least, that it's actually, it's self-contained. So let's go back to the beginning. All right, so you can click and load some presets. So let's go genre specific. We'll do, so we got here, this is pop. Let's see, modern pop. Looking in the mirror of who I see. Took the mask off, here's the real me. Broke the chains and now I'm living free. 1,000 mistakes spelling out the truth. So that's a damn good sounding preset. I don't usually mess with the presets in Ozone, but that's a good sounding one. Looking in the mirror. Looking in the mirror of who. So the presets are pretty cool. Let's get out of the one that we're in. Let's try all-purpose mastering. For instance, let's do emphasize bass. Looking in the mirror of who I see. Took the mask off, here's the real. Looking in the mirror. So you can see it's adding bass. Let's see what happens when we get to the chorus. Can't help it, I'm saying never sorry to say. So yeah, you can see that the standalone version is pretty cool. We're going to be doing most of it inside of the DAW version because I just feel like it'll be more comfortable for you guys to attack the plugin from that. But that is that top transport bar. It's pretty basic stuff if you've used a DAW. You load your track by hitting the plus. You can get rid of your track. Say delete. If you want to do it again, hit this plus to load your track. Alternatively, you can drag and drop as well. It'll analyze the audio and show up the waveform for it. And then you have typical transport style controls and then the rest of the plugin. So let's switch over to the DAW, the plugin version of Ozone 7 right now. All right, welcome back. So I'm back in Logic X and I have iZotope Ozone 7 Advanced pulled up. I want to talk about the interface, the GUI. And to do that, I'm going to talk about just the general GUI that will be visible no matter where you're at inside of Ozone 7 in this video. So if it seems like I glossed over anything in the standalone version, don't worry. We'll cover more of that, like how to actually import and export a song and save it a little bit later in the tutorial course. But I want to get you comfortable with Ozone 7's GUI or user interface. So down here, really the middle of the screen, what you see there is going to be dependent on which of the modules that you have clicked on inside of Ozone 7. So the main screen where you make all your edits will typically be right here in the middle. Like right now, we're looking at the equalizer. If I click on this tab, we're looking at the dynamics. This tab, this is the maximizer, and this is the imager. Now you can click down here to load any of the available modules. You have the equalizer, which is always going to be on by default when you open up Ozone 7, the dynamics and the maximizer. I've added the imager. So when you remove one of these modules, they light up telling you, hey, you know, that's free. You can load that up. So right now we have a module-less, it's hard to say, module-less instance of Ozone 7. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 different modules. Our processor. So you have the equalizer, which looks like this. We've seen that before. You have the vintage EQ, which is new to Ozone 7. We have the vintage tape, which is also new. We have the exciter, we have the vintage compressor, which you'll notice a theme here. All the vintage ones have that kind of sepia toned look. We have the dynamics control. We have the dynamic EQ, and we have the imager, the post equalizer, the vintage limiter, and finally the maximizer. So there's all 11. Now, like I said, that what you see in the middle of the screen, that's dependent on which module you have loaded up. So if we have right now the equalizer and imager, you can see down here on this left bar, this is going to be your module rack. It's going to show you what modules are you have active or you have loaded up. So this screen is going to be the same whether you're in standalone or in the plugin version, and you can load every effect module that you like. So right now, just for this video, we have the equalizer, we have the imager, and we will do the dynamics as well. So to toggle back and forth between either of the modules, you just click on them. And on each module in your little rack area down here in the center, you'll have an X, which will remove it from the signal chain. You have this little kind of it's like a paper bar that will bring up presets for the equalizer or for the module itself. So for instance, let's say you want presets for the dynamics. It's really cool because we're going to touch on the preset browser here, but you'll notice that there's the preset browser for the main thing will load up a whole rack of modules, whereas this little section right here just loads up presets for that specific module. So it's a great learning tool when you're starting to play around with Ozone 7. And then finally you have the solo. This will bypass all of the other modules and just allow you to hear what's going on. And then you can turn things individually on or off. Let's say you're kind of like, okay, I don't know if I like this imager. Instead of hitting the X, which would fully remove it, and then you'd have to go reload it up, it would make more sense to give you the option to just turn it on or off to kind of audition an A and B. Now you'll notice that what you just saw me do, you can drag and drop and rearrange what position the modules are in, and that's very important. Talked about this idea, we talked about this in the one of the first few videos, where you typically want your equalization to occur first, you want your imaging, dynamics, all that stuff. There's a specific order you'd want to happen. You wouldn't necessarily want an exciter, and then after the exciter, do a bunch of EQ cuts, because basically anything that you're exciting, you could be cutting. And this works for a lot of the different modules. It's a lot like mixing. You know, you don't want to put a compressor before the EQ if you haven't done any equalization. You don't want to saturate before you compress if it's the first plugin, you know, in your chain, because usually there's an order in which you want to do it that keeps things musical and keeps things pleasant to the ear. So this is your module rack here. This is your signal chain where you load up your modules. Now under that is kind of the main bar that's going to allow you to do certain things in Ozone 7, like load up whole presets for whole effect chains. So for instance, again, let's say I have a mix that's a little bit kick heavy, and our let's say it's just too much base. I can click clear base. And what this just did is it removed it gives it a clear base presence in the, let's say that it was a little bit muddy or whatever. And it's going to just affect that module, right? If I go to Imager, this is just the blank Imager. Now, if I want to preset on the Imager, again, I click here and I can go to multiband depth or mid-range presence or etc. But down here, this will actually load up whole chains of processing, and you have all-purpose mastering, which if you've come from Ozone 5 or 6, this will look pretty familiar. Then they have genre-specific mastering, which is kind of cool. Definitely great things for, learning how it works and learning the kind of different looks and feels of different genres. And then you have instrument and buses. So this is where you could use Ozone 7 on bus instruments, which I love doing. I love using it on, let's say I have lead guitars. I can load this up and now I have just some pretty simple processing on my lead guitar bus, which would be kind of cool in the mix. And then you also have signature presets, the Greg Calby mastering presets, which is cool. He is a great mastering engineer. Heard of him. So that's what you have going on here. So default, and it will load up the default preset. So this is your preset browser. So directly to the right of the preset browser that pulls up this window here, you have a left and right where you can scroll. Before we go on, I want to talk about these bars down here. You can actually add your own folder. I could call this Echo Soundworks, right? And then I could make presets. I could add, change things, do all that sort of stuff. So it's quite customizable, which is nice. So let's move over to the right. So Ozone comes with its own undo function, which is really cool. Let's say you do something in the EQ and you're like, oh my God, I just ruined everything, but I don't remember what it was before. You can hit undo a couple times and get back to, where things were when you actually liked them, which is nice. Now over here, this little section, this opens up the history and compare window. So there's a history where it kind of takes you through everything you've done. But the main, I think one of the coolest things about this is, I just cleared it. You can actually set up to 4 different references or kind of comparisons. They're called A, B, C, and D. All right, so I've pulled in a track, and we're going to look at how this works because it's quite cool. So you open this up, and let's go to one of the presets, actually. Let's do genre. We'll do all-purpose mastering. We'll do adaptive dynamics, okay? And I'm going to load up this history or compare window. I'm going to click on A, and I'm going to hit set, okay? Now we're going to go to, let's do brighten overall mix, and we're going to set that for B. So you can see now it says A, B. That second one, I loaded the CD master. It's not set, but we can toggle through it if we'd like. And now we're going to, let's do enhanced stereo imaging, and we'll set that as C. I'm going to close this window, and right now we're on enhanced stereo image. Looking in the mirror of who I see. Looking in the mirror of who I see. All right, so that sounds pretty cool, but let's go to the compare window again. And now what I do is I can just click on A. Looking in the mirror of who I see. And you can see that A is highlighted right here with these 2 little bars. And I'm on adaptive dynamics. Now if I click B, which should say brighten overall mix, we're now on brighten overall mix. So I can A-B these really quickly. Looking in the mirror of who I see. Looking in the mirror of who I see. So I like A more than B. Looking in the mirror of who I see. Took the mask off, here's the real me. Broke the chains and now. Okay, I like a combination of A and C. So let me see what's going on with A and C. So here is C. And there's what's going on with the EQ. The imager, I like that. That's pretty cool. And there's the maximizer. So let's actually go and save this preset. I'm going to hit add, and I'll call this ESW tutorial. All right. And now what I can do is I can go back to this window. I can go to, I liked A, and I didn't like B very much. Looking in the mirror. Looking in the mirror of who I see. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stay on A. I'm going to go to the imager, and I'm going to load up the preset in the imager I just saved. So we're going to call it, we call it ESW tutorial. So now I'm kind of mixing and adding my own preset.
Looking in the mirror of who I see. Took the mask off, here's the real me. Broke the chains and now I'm lit.
So I'm going to set this as D.
Looking,
So let's go back to B now, or A now.
looking in the
And we're going to save this equalizer. So we'll call this, this preset is control. Actually, let's save it. We'll save it again. We'll do ESW tutorial for the EQ. And now I'm going to pull this back up, our window, our compare window. I'm going to click on D.
looking in the mirror.
You'll notice that there's no EQ. Well, I'm going to add an EQ, and I want it to happen before the dynamics. And now I'm going to go into the equalizer. I'm going to go click on ESW tutorial. And now I've used this compare window, this history and compare. I made 4 points. But what I did was I kind of made my own module here. So I didn't save that, so let me redo the EQ step real quick. So we're going to go here, and we're going to click on this ESW tutorial. And now what I'm going to do is set this as, I did it wrong again. Let me do this one more time. I'm going to move the EQ over, load up the preset that we saved, which is the ESW tutorial. All right, it's loaded up. So now I have the EQ, dynamics, imager, and maximizer. Now I'm going to hit set for D. So now D will be this. It's kind of our own little thing. So what we're going to do now is we can click on A, B, and D. And D is kind of a combo of what I liked between A and B and C. So let's listen to this.
Looking in the mirror of who I see.
Let's compare that to A.
Looking in the mirror. Looking in Looking in the mirror. Can't help it. I can't help it. I'm saying this. Never sorry to say it. Take it or leave it. I don't believe I'm right where I belong. I know I am happy in my own skin.
All right, so I like that. We just made our own preset. I think it's pretty cool. And we did it using this compare function. This is one of the coolest features inside of Ozone 7, is especially with if you're just starting out, it allows you to compare things and actually see, well, what's happening here? Is it making much of a difference? Now, to the right of that, you have the Open Ozone Settings window. This is kind of like your preferences, if you will. So when you load this up, you're going to get a general thing, which will have graphics, show tooltips, dim controls when bypassed. This is all by default, but if you don't like it showing the tooltips as you arrow over something, you can turn that off, for instance. You can change the opacity for whatever reason you'd want. You can tell it to how often you want to check for updates, remove the authorization if you want to sell licenses, all that sort of stuff. Now, next, you get some specific things. Now, the spectrum, you'll notice, is on right now. You see it? It is on for every module. So you can change this and access the preferences or the settings window a few different ways. You can click down here on the little cogwheel, of course, like we just did, or you can right click in the module and go EQ options or spectrum options. Now you'll notice that the EQ options also show up here and spectrum. So let's click on dynamics and right click. And on a Mac, that is control click, and see what happens. All right, you'll see that you get insert band, copy, and paste. You get some new functions, but you get spectrum options as well as crossover options, which you can see here on the dynamic. You get all that sort of stuff. So this is just a way to control the different visuals on each of the different sections inside of Ozone. Now, one that I will say is pretty cool is if you click on this, it's the spectrum. So if you go to spectrum type, you can change it from linear to a third octave, or you can change it to critical, which is really nice for kind of figuring out your low end. You can do a lot of different stuff here. You can change the window type. You can do a lot of cool stuff. So you can do full octave, which is nice. We'll go back to linear. You have peak hold time. You have the window. There's a bunch of cool things that you can do. You can have it fill in the spectrum, which is personally my preference. So we'll turn that back on so you get that. So that's what's going on down there in the little cogwheel. It's just all your different options, which are preferences for you. Now next you get the question mark, which will bring up the manual, which you should never need because you're watching my tutorial. But if you ever need to reference anything, you just click that little question mark and good things will happen. All right. Moving over to the right, you get the audio kind of audition window. Now, this is a pretty important window. There are the meters, which are incredibly important to mastering. So don't just gloss over these as, okay, they're meters. I can see that in my DAW. Well, no, you can't, because these meters give you peak value and RMS value, and you can zoom in. You can do things like control how you see them, which is you cannot do in Logic. And according to the best of my knowledge, you cannot actually do that in too many DAWs. So let's work top down here in this audio audition, the audio bar of Ozone 7. All right, so working top down with these meters here, you get this first control. It's this weird little, it's a switch. It doesn't necessarily look like a switch, but it is. It will change the metering visualizer, or the visual cue that you get from the normal mode. It'll go from stereo to mid-side, which is kind of cool. So these are your different meters down here. You have the peak, and then you have the RMS for each. You have peak left and peak right, as well as RMS left, RMS right for both the input and the output. That's what I meant by in any DAW, I don't care what it is, you don't get that level of control on your just master fader. So what I'm going to do real quick is we're going to pop this over on the actual track itself. So I just got a little bit quieter, but that's okay. What I wanted to show you is the feature here where you can unlink the with these padlocks down here. You can unlink the channels in stereo mode. So let's loop this.
Looking in the mirror, looking in the mirror.
All right, let's say I just wanted to check my left part of the mix.
Looking in the mirror,
There it is.
who I see. Took the mask off, here's the real me. Broke the chains and now I'm living free. 1,000 mistakes spelling out the looking in the mirror.
All right, so that's a really cool metering method for when you're trying to, maybe you're doing some imaging, maybe you're doing some trying to get some width to the channel that doesn't have enough width. That's the way to do it. It's pretty cool that you have that, and you can just link and unlink. So if it's linked with the padlock locked, it'll move both the left and right channel together, and unlocked, it will move them however you have them set. So for instance, let's say you wanted one a little bit down because maybe the mix, maybe your left channel is a little bit higher than the right channel, or maybe so you want to turn it down a little bit. You can lock it once you get it set and then move it accordingly. All right, so under that you get the auditioning options. So the first one you get is bypass.
Looking in the mirror, looking in the
This simply just turns off Ozone.
looking in the mirror, who I see. Took the mask off, here's the real me.
Okay, but there's the next thing, it looks like a little ear, I think. I don't know what it is, but it's one of the coolest features inside of Ozone 7. So if I hit bypass, listen.
Looking in the mirror, looking in the
It got quieter. And I mentioned this before in the some of the previous videos. The human ear is pretty stupid, and it thinks that louder things sound better, especially musical things. And that's a problem when you're A/Bing, right? So if you have this on, this is going to tell Ozone to automatically gain stage it to even it out when you bypass it. So right now, here it is with everything on. That kind of preset we made using the history window where we kind of made our own combination of presets.
looking in the mirror, who I see.
Now when I hit bypass,
Looking in the mirror, who I see.
it's peaking in Logic at -2.2. Now let's turn it back on.
Looking in the mirror, who I see. Took the mask off.
All right, it peaked at 1.8. So let's bypass again.
Looking in the mirror, who I see. Took the mask off.
All right, so that's with the little ear on, which it should be auto gaining. So let's try it with auto gain off. So here it is with Ozone on.
Looking in the mirror, who I see.
Peaks at -1.8 decibels. Now it's bypassed.
Looking in the mirror, who I see. Took the mask off. Here's the
All right, so it peaks at -7.7. So that's 5 decibels difference. That's a pretty big difference to the human ear. With bypass on, it's not perfect, but it's a lot closer. So now you can actually think, you can actually think, hear, listen, really get into is what you're doing, is it actually making it sound better?
looking in the mirror, who I see. Took the mask off. Here's the real me. Broke the chains and
In this instance, I would say yes, what we've done already to this little track is sounding a little bit better, so I like it. All right, now the next thing that you get is mono. You want to check your mix in mono? Here's how you can do it.
Looking in the mirror of who I see. Took the mask off, he's the real me.
So it sounds pretty good inside of mono. And then you get swap. This is going to swap out the left and right channels.
Looking in the mirror of who I see. Took the mask off, he's the
Which is kind of cool. Good way to check your mix, your stereo imaging, and your phase issues if you have them. Now codec, we're going to talk about a little bit later. This is the different codec in the preview settings. You can change the bit rate and all that sort of stuff for MP3, AAC, the different codecs. So you can have it on 320 kbps if you want. I like setting mine to about 224 or 256. 192 seems a little bit low. I like being at that 256 range typically. Next you get the enables the preview of the MP3 and AAC codecs.
looking in the mirror.
So if you're not on your high-res monitors in your listening environment, that's not going to do a whole lot. And then next you have dither. That's for when you're actually trying to get, if you're getting higher bit rates and you need to get onto a CD, that's how you can do it. And then finally, you get the bypass current dither module if you are dithering. I don't see a huge need for dithering for me personally because I record at 44 kilohertz, 24-bit. But if you're recording at higher kilohertz, higher bit depth, dithering might be an option. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the tutorial course. But basically, what happens is you get these bit depths and you try to dither and kind of reduce the amount of sonic distortion or harmonic distortion and just noise that you might get from converting to different bit depths. That's what dithering is doing. Anyway, that's what's happening inside the GUI, the graphical user interface of Ozone 7. So we touched on this bar down here as well as this bar over to the right. Everything else is going to be different depending on what module you load up. So starting in the next video, we're going to be jumping into the equalizer module inside of Ozone 7. I'll see you there.